meetings. So right now I'm setting that up. If you wait with me for a second. Okay, I think we're good. So welcome everybody as you join. Glad to have you here. I wish we were all together at the high school as it's a common theme for the past few months, but we're getting used to these Zooms, and I think we can still have a good discussion and hopefully answer any questions people have. This meeting is generally pretty informal when we met in person, a panelist of just current topics. So on our panel this morning is myself, Jody O'Donnell, Courtney Langford. We are the co-presidents of the PFA. And then we have our great principal, Mr. Egan, as well as assistant principals Ari Rothman, Larry Sullivan, and Christy Carrero. So they will all be helping to answer any of your questions. As you do have questions, please use the Q&A feature, which is down below there, and you can submit a question and we will get to it as we can. There's no real matters of PFA business. I just mentioned that we do have next Tuesday morning a 12th grade networking session with some great speakers. So any 12th grade parents, please try to tune in. Of course, it will be recorded if you cannot. And then for December, we really just have one 9th grade session. So save the date for December 3rd. So with that, Bill, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Jody. Honestly, it's always a pleasure to speak before our parent group. Like Jody said, I wish we were in person. I think it's a bummer, but certainly I think we've been having some pretty good programming and figuring out a way how to navigate this. This is an interesting program we started a few years back where we do a coffee with the principals. Now, I did bring my coffee, but as you all will probably say, I generally always have coffee. So this is Coffee with the Principals, an opportunity for you guys to ask questions. I did think it was probably beneficial for me to talk a little bit about, we seem to have a pretty good run here after the initial start of the year where we had a case and a lot of quarantines. We had a pretty good run and we started full time a couple of weeks ago. And, we're back now. We had some cases in the past week. I think we had 5 cases, including a staff member now who are positive with COVID. And what that meant is we had to quarantine, I think it's maybe 213 students who are now in quarantine for, in some cases, a week, in some cases, a couple of weeks, depending on the point of last contact with a student. But I could talk a little bit through the process and then answer some questions that people have about that or anything that they might have around school. Again, this is really an opportunity to kind of have a conversation with us. I wish it was in person because it feels a little better having a conversation, but we'll gladly take questions through the Q&A. So basically what happens is we get notified of positive COVID cases, whether it be through parents calling the school or through the health department in town. And then we have to backtrack. And we start with the student and ask who are your close contacts. And then we turn to the seating charts in class. Now that we're back full time, we really want to look 6 feet, 6 feet for more than 15 minutes as close contacts. So if you're in a classroom, we're really looking around a student, and our student desks are generally 3 feet apart in most classrooms in the building. Science is a little different. Science is about 4 feet apart, maybe even 5 from student to student. So it's a little bit different. So you can quarantine less in a science classroom than you can in a general classroom. And then you have some anomalies like a foods class or a woodworking class where the teacher and students are generally all over the class, even though we're trying to separate them through plexiglass or doing individual labs or doing things like that. There's a lot more contact than there is in a normal classroom. So in those cases, you generally lose an entire class, but they're generally smaller classes than a normal class. There was also a case this week, and again, but out of an abundance of caution there, where the student didn't know, not one person who they were sitting around, and the teacher did not have, who happens to be a long-term sub, did not have a seating chart. So because of that, we had to put out the entire class. That was like 16 kids. not something we want to do. We've talked to our teachers about having seating charts and all that. So hopefully that doesn't happen in the future. But if it does, that's the way we'll have to handle it. So ultimately if there was no knowledge of that, we'll put the entire class out. But for the most part, depending where a student sits, if you could picture a student sitting in the middle of a classroom and they're 3 feet apart, you could take, I guess it would be 8 people that would be then put in quarantine. Many times though, a student will sit on the edges of a class. So then you're looking at maybe 3 people who would have to quarantine. So it really depends on where they sit in a class. But there can be quite a number of kids that would quarantine. Entire teams will quarantine if there's an issue and a student is on a team. So sometimes you'll see large numbers have to quarantine because of that. So that's generally the process with how we go through to come up with our numbers of quarantines. And again, it's all done out of the abundance of caution. Some people have asked about, well, how come we don't shut down the school to do that? And the answer is because we have the positive COVID case already out of the building. So at that point, it's really the direct contacts that are in the building. And as long as the positive COVID case is out, we really don't feel like we need to shut down. We can contact trace throughout the day, get those students out of the building. There's been some question about that. And some people feel like, well, some schools do that. And they do it because could be a variety of reasons why they do it. But we feel like we can do it during the day and keep our buildings open and run instead of having to shut down during the day. We think it's a more efficient way to do it, and students are still safe because the positive COVID case is out of the building. So that's kind of where we're at. Some people have questions about metrics. Metrics come out every Thursday, and Dr. Lutzy works with the health department, and that will guide us kind of where we go. As I said yesterday in my letter, our goal is to keep students in the building. We'd love that to be full time. We'd love that to be, if it had to be, a lesser version hybrid. Dr. Lutzy and the health department will determine that. But we want students to stay in school. That's our goal. And that's the whole point of quarantining and trying to isolate the positive cases, is to keep the students safe, keep each other safe, keep the staff safe. We want to make sure that everyone stays safe. We haven't seen any instances of community transmission, meaning classroom to classroom in the school. All of these cases, for the most part, are seemingly through family transmission. So if I have it, my daughter has it, that sort of thing, and then we get a positive that way. That seems to be the majority of the cases, but that's pretty much how that works. I know there was probably a great deal of questions about that, as we have had a busy last 2 days. I'm hopeful it will come down for at least a couple of days now. I know this morning there was nothing waiting for me coming into school, which was good. Are there any questions around quarantining? I think I see something in the Q&A. What does that say,
Yeah.
Krista?
It says, isn't it easier to contact trace in the hybrid model and less risk? I do understand why we are in full person, especially in the high school. Can you speak to that? I
Sure.
don't understand, sorry.
Sure. So basically, hybrid would make it easier. You'd quarantine less. Absolutely. But if you look at it like this, there's a couple of ways to look at that. Like when you're in hybrid and you have to quarantine, you'd quarantine a lot less people. There's no doubt, because there'd be a lot more space in the classroom. However, right now we probably have 80% of our students in the building, even with quarantining all the kids we just did. If you're in hybrid, you're only at 50% capacity in the building. So while it's somewhat disruptive, and while it's a little bit, I don't know why these are scary, it definitely makes people feel odd, having people leave the building and all that. There's still 80% of our kids in the building every day. And to me, that is a good thing. Now that may change, right? The metrics may change that, and Dr. Lutzy and the health department will work through that. And if we had to change into a different mode, whether that be hybrid or even if we had to go remote, they'll make that decision in keeping us safe. But as far as is hybrid, it's easier, yes, to do quarantine in hybrid, but there's less people in the building. Any other questions around quarantining or COVID? well, this is a little bit of a unique opportunity for everybody. Okay, so we're willing to take anything about culture, sports, classes, anything you want to talk about. This is your opportunity to kind of ask a question and talk to us. We're willing to, have a discussion about anything you'd like. And my assistant principals really, really like to speak. So I'm willing to turn these answers over to them.
Wow, no questions.
Everybody's happy with everything? I love it.
How is Spirit Week going, Bill? Or Larry or Ari or Christy?
Christy, I think you want to
Well,
talk about this.
I was the only administrator to wear, my jersey yesterday.
I believe tomorrow is 90s day, so I may be here in a flannel. I don't know.
Also among us, Christy is the only former cheerleader. So when you're looking for Spirit, she's your person.
I think a couple questions are popping into the Q&A.
What is the latest status of winter sports?
Gosh, I don't want to speak for the athletic department, but I thought it was the 17th that the CIC was coming out with some determination. DPH did give some guidelines on sports. So I do think that sports, the DPH has a whole category of things, right? So high risk sports that can't happen. I think wrestling is a real problem, and I'll let the athletic department speak to all that. But there are others, if they put in the mitigation strategies like masks, I think they're allowing. Now, that may change with the metrics that pop up and all that stuff too. Could they push the seasons back? All that stuff, they might, I guess. That's really going to be, determined through the health department. But DPH has given some guidelines on and CIC, I think, will follow them on how sports will happen. So, for example, you might have to wear masks to play basketball. So I think that might happen, but high risk sports like wrestling might be more of a problem. So I think that's coming out. I think the 17th is where the CIAC will actually give the final guidance on all that. So we'll have more information then.
And then with that, if we do end up back on hybrid or full distance learning, will all after school activities automatically be canceled?
No.
I can answer that. We've already got, in terms of our clubs, the majority of them are working through Zoom anyway, and the same thing goes even in terms of involving kids who are full-time remote already. So those things can continue. Obviously, decisions will be made under the hybrid, but in terms of full remote, I think we'll have to face whatever the dictation is about contact activities. I know that there was an attempt in the spring to do something with theater, and I believe that will even, there'll be the same attempt or even more of an attempt to do something should we all go out. So we will try and continue as many activities as possible.
I think it's continue what you can. Hybrid will not stop any sports at all. So when sports start, if we're in hybrid, sports will go on. Now, the caveat to that was always a little bit different. So let's say a town, and many of these towns are now in the red, right? But let's say a town is fully remote. That might change it. So let's say we're hybrid and the town is fully remote. It might be that we don't play that team, because they're out fully remote. Likewise, if we were out fully remote and somebody was in a hybrid, that might change that too. So I would like to give with all of this, right? It's like a hard and fast answer. I'd like to say yes or no to everything, but there's a slight caveat to everything that says, well, maybe, so we'd like to say that sports will all continue. And if we're in hybrid and everybody else stays in a hybrid environment, yeah, it will. But there are some things that would say maybe it wouldn't. Let's say it got bad enough that the governor said, you know what, all schools had to shut down. I don't think that's a plan. They're not looking to do that. They actually came out with some guidance, I believe yesterday. It said, hey, we want schools to stay open. We want them to stay in-person learning as much as possible, to the highest extent possible. But if he did shut it down, that would be probably different. So I would say there's a caveat to all of this, right? So we're going to play as much. We're going to do as much as we can, whether it be a club, whether it be a sports activity, whether it be all of that.
Another question is asking, how are the teachers feeling about managing remote learners and in-person classes?
It's a challenge. It's new. I think that's, well, put it this way. I think they're doing a pretty good job, and I think they're doing a better job all the time with that. I think everybody, it was a combination of happy to have everybody back in the building on a full-time basis, but also feeling like, wow, there's a lot of kids here. But I think it's something we're doing a pretty good job on and getting better all the time, whether it be navigating how to use breakout rooms, how to have kids work together in a collaborative way. I think we're getting pretty good at it, to be honest with you. And I think it's hopefully a skill that we'll be able to use as we move forward and get past this pandemic, because the truth is, I think we've learned some things from a perspective of being better educators that will help guide us moving forward. But it's a challenge. I'm not going to lie. Anything different is challenging for people. And then you put a stressful situation like, operating your job in the middle of a pandemic. That's not easy. I do feel for teachers, because I think it's stressful.
Mr. Rothman, there's a question about, will there be a Zoom club fair and what's the date?
What we did was, it's tough to do the club fair format through Zoom. So what we have, and it's been up for, I'd say, a couple of weeks now, is the listing on the website for co-curricular activities. A number of clubs created videos, and it's the same type of introductory and informational video. We're adding more and more, and we'll update that listing with more videos every couple of weeks.
And
So it's already available.
Can students continue to join those clubs over the next?
Absolutely. There's no time frame, in terms of getting involved. Just as we will have clubs that will, a kid will come up with an idea or develop a new interest and want to start a new club. So that's why it is a fluid list, and it's updated as often as I can.
I
Go
see that.
ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry, Bill. I see there's a question regarding the virtual college visits for mostly for seniors, but you could have some juniors as well. There is a process for students to sign up for those in advance through the College and Career Center. Generally, we ask that they try to plan ahead for 2 days ahead, so we know that. And the question is also, getting teacher permission. So we do ask students to ask the teacher for permission if there's something essential going on in the classroom that the teacher really feels the student can't miss. That can be a discussion. A lot of the time, it also might involve the student's school counselor. There is also a form that if a student can't attend a virtual meeting, but still wants the college to know of their interest, that there's a form that they can fill out through school counseling as well.
And the other thing I was saying before about clubs, and I credit Mr. Rothman for really spearheading this, but we really want kids to be involved. So if you see your child not involved in something, encourage them. And if they're not sure what they want to get involved in, reach out to Mr. Rothman personally, because he is so good about trying to spot the right club for the right kid. And the truth is, we want them to be physically distant but socially connected. So if there's anybody who's not, please make sure you reach out to us, because we want to find a way to make sure they can get connected here.
Mr. Egan, any plans for outdoor heaters?
I got to see if the fire marshal will allow it. It was hard getting all the tents up in the first place, and then we had that crazy windstorm where we lost some of them. But stay tuned, I guess. Stay tuned. We'll work on something if I can. And I have to pass that by the superintendent, so hopefully I'm not.
Just going back to the clubs, Mr. Rothman, can you once again say where you can find the clubs online?
I'm actually going to go on the high school website. I just answered a question. I wrote an answer about paddle, but I'm going to go on the high school website and copy the link in and send it.
Can you just say that answer to the paddle? Because if someone's recording it, they can't see the questions.
Yes, a couple of kids actually just met with me last week with an interest to restart the paddle club. And we talked about it, and we're just sort of figuring out logistics of how it could work. So as soon as things are worked out, it'll be posted and ready to go.
Mr. Egan, do you know if, the New Canaan Public Schools has considered shifting the half days to the afternoon slot to allow for teacher training in the morning and allowing students to have much needed sleep?
No, I actually don't know that we've considered that. Probably because it takes, it takes into consideration all schools. Not that that couldn't happen. That's not something I've personally thought about here, but it's something we can consider. One thing the block schedule does is allows for students who have an early block off to be able to sleep in significant more time. That was one of the benefits of having the block was to give people the opportunity to kind of have a sleep in and get more time. That's something I have not considered. We can consider it. So I guess stay tuned. We can get back to you on that.
Just a comment that said not all students do have a sleep in.
No, I get that. I do understand that. The benefit is that you do get a longer time. Not everybody gets it. I get that. We thought about even trying to create a full rotation through. Right now, it's not possible with our current schedule, where everybody would get a benefit. And then if we continue with the block in the future, that would be something we would take a look at, trying to have a full rotation. So everybody would receive that benefit at least once in a cycle, if not twice in a cycle. So that is something we've thought about as we've gone through this year. Tried to see some of the pitfalls with what we're doing and trying to make improvements as we move forward. But I think that's a decent idea to have a conversation about, even if it's once in a while, to flip it and almost kind of put the PL in the morning and flip flop it.
Will the half days, Wednesdays continue for the rest of the year?
Right now, they're continuing through the calendar year. Honestly, the superintendent works with the Board of Education to set those days, and they've set them through the calendar year. So that's December 31st. Whether they continue or not in the future, we think they've been beneficial to our teachers. That's something I'd be a proponent of because they really helped with as they're working through e-learning, remote learning, and our block schedule. It's really given them quality time that they need to kind of prepare. So I'd be a proponent of that. However, I can't speak past December 31st.
Is it true that we are encouraging high school students to leave campus during free periods?
I've been encouraging that all year. Ideally, it's all with parent permission. Parents should sign out. We have a form that we've asked parents to sign out. We have a sign-out sheet if they're walkers, where they can walk, and we want parents to pick up their children if they're underclassmen, or if they can drive, they can drive. We do ask them to sign out as they leave campus. So that is something we've asked for all kids this year because of the pandemic, to reduce the density in the building. The idea is less kids, the better off we are. So in the past, we've had kids, the library was mobbed with kids, and so was the cafeteria. And we're really trying to reduce the density in the building, and that's the idea behind it.
For half days, can a student be remote on Wednesdays in the building the rest of the days of the week?
Ideally, if students are in-person learners, we want them to be in-person learners. However, we've left this caveat out there that if somebody is not feeling that awesome, that they can call the school and say, hey, I'm not feeling that great today, but I'm not sick enough to go to the doctor. I just want to make sure I feel better for tomorrow, so I'm going to log in at home. So we've given that caveat to people to do, and people take advantage of it. So while I can't say that you can do that, we've given a caveat to people to be able to take advantage of needing what they need to do to feel as well as they possibly can and not come to school feeling ill. That might not totally answer your question, but I think it gives some guidance.
But Bill, you've also said on that the parent needs to.
The parent has to call. We don't want the kid doing that, but just because it's too hard and too onerous on the teachers at that point. Kids will be emailing teachers going, hey, I'm not going to be in today or whatever. So we want the parent to be aware of what's happening with their child. And as you all are, I know that. But we want them to really be the one to say, my child has permission to stay home because they weren't feeling that well. So they're going to log on to the Zoom. We think that's better for everybody, because that way, the other piece with that is the teachers then, we have somebody here who enters all that into the computer. and the teachers then see an icon on PowerSchool that has the headphones, and that for us means temporary remote learner. So they then know that the student is a temporary remote learner. Whereas if Bill Egan emails Ari Rothman, other teachers won't know that I was temporary remote learner. So this gives the identification to all the teachers that I'd be out for the day. And keep the questions coming. You have a full captive audience here.
Here comes one.
All right.
Is there any guidance for families that have siblings of high school students returning home from college for Thanksgiving break?
You know, don't let them go to parties. You know, I said that, but the truth is that is the number one fear for people, is that the kids coming home from college, you know, you hope they're not getting in large groups when they're leaving school, you know, right before school. Let's face it, we all remember college. The most fun time was right before Thanksgiving and then coming home for Thanksgiving. So it's tough to tell a college kid not to behave like a college kid. But, you know, what we don't want to do is endanger your families or endanger the community. You know, I've heard reports, and I don't get involved in you know, a college kid having parties and things like that, but people have told me things like, this kid's having a party, you know, invited over 100 people. Like, that's a bad idea. It's a bad idea for all of the people involved, and it's a bad idea for the community. You know, I think what you hear from the governor, and you hear from, I'm certainly no expert, but I do know more than I should probably now about this virus and how it spreads. You know, one of the things you see, it's these large gatherings that are really the biggest problem, and probably the biggest area of spread that we see in this community. You know, we're not seeing the spread like crazy that we were fearful of in school, but we are seeing it coming from families. And a lot of those family things are coming from get-togethers. You know, so while I don't have any judgment of anyone or anything they do, you know, I would say be careful. You know, you have your college kid coming home, be careful. You know, you've heard the experts talk about even having large family gatherings for Thanksgiving. It's tough. You know, do you want to get everybody together? Those are family decisions. I don't weigh in on that, but I know we're going to make some difficult choices in my house too, around who we're going to get together with. But, you know, again, those are for you guys to decide.
Will there be fully remote learning 2 weeks after Thanksgiving to prevent outbreaks?
You know, honestly, the commissioner and Department of Public Health actually came out and said, don't do that. They said it's actually worse. We do not see spread in school. And realistically, we should not be shutting down schools for that. Now, they said you may see schools shut down because of lack of staffing. You know, there's so many people who either have a hard time getting subs to run buildings and things like that. But they said, don't do it. They said it's better for kids to be in school from an emotional standpoint. And basically, we shouldn't see spread. If we continue our mitigation factors, you shouldn't see massive spread in school.
Can a student go remote for part of the day if they need to do a college visit the remainder of the day?
You know, we've been extremely flexible with students. So if you need to do that, call the school, let us know. You know, the idea is really any COVID related issues. You know, families can choose to go remote if they need to go remote too. So even for that family that just, somebody asked a question before about shutting down for 2 weeks. Well, if you felt strongly and you wanted your child to stay home for those 2 weeks, feel free to do that. Call the school, say my child's gonna be a remote learner for this time period, and we'll accommodate it. You know, that's one thing that I think we've been trying to say is we've got to be flexible. And it's harder on the school and teachers and all that, but we think it's probably better if there's a concern, let's keep everybody healthy. So if you feel like we should probably stay, you know, keep our kids away for those 2 weeks, then feel free to do that. Call the school and be a remote learner. You know, there is guidance around, you know, it's probably stronger guidance for staff than it is for families. But travel, you know, you travel into quarantine states and different things like that. And they're almost all quarantine states at this point. I think at this point, every state is, probably even Connecticut is for everybody else. But around testing and all that, you know, and for staff, it's a little stronger. You know, we're pretty much advising people, don't go anywhere. You know, we want you to stay healthy and well. It's our job to be here.
Bill, a question about if we need subs to cover for teachers who are quarantined, and can teachers teach from home?
There's two pieces to that. If you're too sick to teach, then you're too sick to teach if you have COVID. If you're quarantined because let's say you had a close contact. So let's say Larry and I are, I don't know, brothers, and Larry has COVID and I have to quarantine, but I have no symptoms, which is the way probably it would work. Larry would be sick and I wouldn't. I'm only kidding. So, so then I could teach remotely, and we'd have a sub in the classroom and I would teach remotely. So that's how that would work. But it's, again, like everything else, there's a little bit of a nuance to it.
Really nice comment here.
I'll take a nice comment. Any more nice comments are good too.
Our daughter is a freshman this year and says she loves school. So thank you for your professionalism, perseverance, and commitment to the students. We are truly grateful for your efforts.
Well, that's very kind. Thank you. Any other questions? Again, we'll take anything.
Thank you for all you're doing to keep our children safe and engaged.
Well, that's sweet.
How are the nurses doing?
Tough job, honestly. Like, again, it's a fascinating thing, right? I think throughout all this, the one thing I've noticed is kids really appreciate school more than they ever did. You know, they're truly happy to be back in the building and are really thankful. I would say the same for families. And I would say the nurses have a real, well, I think families have a great appreciation for teachers, and we're always fortunate in New Canaan because I think they've always valued their teachers. I think the nurses have a newfound love from the community and from the staff and from everybody else. They're doing really a tough job. You know, they have to contact trace all these kids and then have really difficult conversations with families and kind of talk through all of this, make people feel good, make people feel settled, make people feel secure, and also safe. So I couldn't thank them enough. It's a tough job. You know, it really is a tough job. So Janet Reed kind of heads all of them. And, you know, the people we have here are great. And I'm sure the other schools have wonderful nurses too.
Bill, did we need to, or were we able to hire more nurses to help with the workload?
If people want to hire more, no, I'm not kidding. We do bring in a sub. We've asked Janet to do that. I think what we're going to have is a floater nurse every day, and they're going to go to the school that's most in need at the time. So the answer to that is yes.
And here's a general comment, just an important reminder of all admin, faculty, and families to continue the message of support for those infected, you know, of COVID, that COVID shaming happening to students who have had to quarantine others. And there's lots of anxiety for students around that.
It totally is. I mean, that's such an important message, you know. The truth is, like, we had when we had our first case here, there was somebody who was positive as an adult in the building. There were some conversations were very personal in nature for people. And the one thing I kept wanting to say to people is that person okay? That's really the bottom line. You know, this is a unique virus in the sense that some people have very little symptoms and some people get severely ill. And I just want everybody to be okay. And I don't want anyone having lasting effects. You know, somebody sent me an email yesterday after I sent the email home. And they talked about, and again, I'm guessing this is the person in their 40s, you know, it's a parent in the building. They talked about their experience with COVID. They got COVID themselves in March, and they struggled for 5 months and now have almost autoimmune-like issues that they never had previous, like MS almost, and are shocked at the toll it took on them. And they are getting better, but you're looking at 5 months and they're still not right. And that's a relatively young person, you know? So, and I've shared this before, my, again, not to scare people, but my first superintendent, he hired me as a principal. He died of COVID back in April of last year, and he was 49. You know, so it's not, while it's not likely, it's also not unfounded.
Do you think that the high school will be able to offer the free asymptomatic testing again?
Dr. Lutzy is really working very hard to make that a possibility. It's not that easy. Like to bring this group in was really tough because it's just not easy to get them. So I know he's working on alternative testing solutions, even with the town. But I don't know when or where, if there'll be another opportunity like that, or when it will be. But I do know he's working on testing opportunities.
There's a question regarding quarantine, asking why one can travel out of state and return to school with a negative COVID test, but can't test out of the quarantine.
Just the way the rules are through the state. Like New York has a double test, I think, to be able to return. Whereas with us, in Connecticut, it's within 72 hours, but you still can't test out of quarantine for the schools. Just the way it is. So.
Yeah, I would also imagine it's based on the fact that we know definitively somebody had close contact with a positive case.
Sure.
when it comes to us versus being in a state. They may not have interacted with anybody who did have a positive case.
That's a great point, and absolutely why these guys are around me, because if they'll know I didn't answer something right, they'll fill in the gaps for me.
Even though I'm the guy who's going to get sick. Okay, I got it.
What other questions? We'll be glad to answer anything. Well, I certainly, yeah, is there another one? All right. I certainly don't want to keep people longer. We were on for about 40 minutes, so that's not bad. If people do have any questions, feel free to email any one of the administrators here. Obviously, you know that you can reach out to Jody and Courtney anytime you want. But personally, I want to thank you guys. It truly is a privilege to be a part of the New Canaan community. I think this is the most special high school. And, I feel fortunate to be a part of it. And I'm speaking for the assistant principals as well in that regard. I just see a question popped up. What's there, Christy?
It says, has there been any positive cases from a close contact at school?
Not yet. Not yet. It's not to say that it couldn't happen, but we haven't seen any, at least to my knowledge. I don't believe so. It's an interesting thing too, because we're not even really supposed to HIPAA rights and all that stuff. We're not even really supposed to know who these cases are, all that. So we really work with the nurses, but there's a lot we do know, but some of it we have to be careful of some confidential information that we share.
Yeah, that's a good point, that if you do get a call that your child has to quarantine, don't expect them to tell you why, they can't share that information. They, just tell you how long you have to quarantine for.
And
we'll know.
And kind of tying back to that COVID shaming thing, it's like those people don't want to be sick. They don't want to be positive. They don't want to put themselves in that spot. I feel for anybody. I want everybody to be well, but they certainly don't want to get it. I totally get that. And, I just want to make sure that the one thing I said before this whole pandemic started, the research about pandemics is that people generally are sometimes ashamed of their behavior after pandemics are over. And for us and with this school, I want this to lead with kindness throughout all of this. So everybody we run into or have a conversation with, even if we're not always spoken to the way we'd love to be spoken to, we want to make sure that we lead with kindness, and every message we share is about kindness. So I love that being positive and asking, being concerned about the health of the people who have COVID, because I think that's probably the most important thing. I know it is, actually. I think that's it. I don't see any of the questions in the question and answer thing. So it was great having coffee with the principals. And once again, I thank you guys, and we will talk to you soon. Any questions, feel free to reach out directly, okay?
Be
Thank
well,
you.
everybody.
Take
Bye,
care.
guys.